On episode 302 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet with Clare Morris and discuss her book, Diet for the Mind. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/302. The 40 Plus Fitness podcast is sponsored by Health IQ, an insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, vegetarians, etc. get lower rates on their life insurance. Go to healthiq.com/40plus, that's 40PLUS, to support the show and see if you qualify. I know life insurance isn't always top of mind, but you really should make sure that you have your family's back. If you need some coverage, wouldn't you like to pay less? Since you're a health-conscious person, Health IQ may be able to help. When you check them out and get your free quote at healthiq.com/40plus, you help support the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, and you might just save some money on something you need. To see if you qualify, get your free quote today at healthiq.com/40plus or mention the promo code 40plus when you talk to a Health IQ agent. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello, and thank you for being a part of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast. I'm really happy to have you here for today's interview. Now, the move goes on. Obviously, as you may know, I'm moving from Louisiana to Florida, my life change, and it has been a comedy of errors. I mean, it really has. We did hire movers, but they showed up with a truck that was a little too small. And so the end result was I had to come, and I'm recording this now from Ruston, Louisiana, because I had to come back here, rent a trailer, and load up the things that they couldn't get in their truck. So, I have a feeling based on how much stuff we've got now in boxes and whatnot that I'm going to be doing a lot of unpacking and a lot of organizing for the month of January. So that's what January is going to be for me is get things organized, get things where they need to be. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I kid. Anyway, I really am excited. I've launched the group training and it is really going well. I'm really excited about the community we're building. We're getting folks from all over. And the weekly conference calls are a blast. I'm having so much fun, and I'm really enjoying helping people reach their health and fitness goals. So it's a really cool environment. I think you should check it out. If you're serious about making 2018 your year for health and fitness, I think that's where you need to be. So go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/train, and you can learn about the group training and the one-on-one. Like I said, I'm really excited about the group training because I think it gives people a cost-effective way to work with me, to get their questions answered, to get what they need, the support, the accountability, all of that in a very low price. So I really do encourage you to go check it out at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/train. So now for today's guest. Dr. Clare Morris has spent 20 years researching the link between Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline, and diet. She's a professor of epidemiology, director of the section of nutrition and nutritional epidemiology in the Department of Internal Medicine, and assistant provost of the community research at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. She's also the lead creator of the Mind Diet. Now, the cool thing about the Mind Diet, it is kind of a mix of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet. So if you don't know a lot about those two diets, we do get into that in great detail. And I also get her to compare and contrast this to eating for ketosis. And so it's a really interesting conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it. So with no further ado, here's Dr. Morris. So Dr. Morris, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be talking to you.
As someone who works specifically and I only work with people over the age of 40, it's kind of that time of our lives when we start to recognize kind of a little bit of change in our cognitive ability. We forget where we put our keys just a little bit more often. We're not on that learning track that we were when we were in our 20s and even into our 30s. We've kind of earned it at this point. So a lot of us are kind of at this steady state and then kind of feel that gradual losing a little bit. So I was very interested to get your book because I'm very interested in how diet can help with cognitive ability. I know that exercise can, and we'll talk about that a little bit more because you had that in the book too, along with some other things. But I think, and you mentioned it specifically in the book, what you eat is actually probably the biggest component of all of that.
Diet is definitely a big part of it, but there's been less research on diet than there has been on exercise.
And that's why I wanted to thank you specifically for doing some of that research, because there's no reason for a drug company to want to compare their drug against what a diet can do. There's no benefit to telling us to eat something versus eating something else for the most part, unless sugar was healthy. And then I'm sure the sugar industry would be all over it. But, it's just kind of one of those things of saying, you're right. There's not enough study on it. So it is refreshing that you've got some long-term studies and you've got some real data that I'm hopeful over time more and more, particularly I guess universities will kind of step up and say, let's really get to the bottom of, what we can do to keep dementia from being a problem.
Yes, there are more and more studies being done, and we recently started a large randomized diet intervention trial where we'll be testing the MIND diet. People will be randomly assigned to consume the MIND diet or their usual diet with fewer calories. And after 3 years, we'll be able to say whether their cognition improved or, at least didn't decline over time. And we're also measuring their brain through neuroimaging.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other kind of part of this is any study you're going to do related to food and improvement, particularly cognitive improvement, you really need years to get that study done. So there's a lot of moving parts in that.
Yes, they're very hard to accomplish, these kinds of studies.
So, like I said, some of us are going to occasionally forget where we left our keys, or we're going to call at 6 o'clock when the appointment was actually at 6:30, which I just did. But then we start talking about dementia, the biggest part of which is Alzheimer's. Can you kind of define what the difference in the two was? How would I recognize one versus the other?
Alzheimer's disease is a form of dementia that affects your ability to function in life. So just, forgetting a person's name or not remembering where you put your keys is a temporary loss in your memory that ordinarily does not interfere with your ability to do your day-to-day function. So a person with Alzheimer's disease might not remember how to balance a checkbook for the first time in their life, or they might not be able to figure out how to work a can opener. These kinds of things that we don't even think about in our daily life.
Okay. So basically, and one of the ways I heard it stated one time is regular cognitive decline is occasionally you forget where you put your keys. Dementia is probably more of you find your keys in the refrigerator and don't remember putting them in there.
Yes, that could be a very good way of putting it.
Okay.
Yeah, but, it's a progressive disease, so you lose more and more of your cognitive abilities. And for a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, you must have memory loss. That is central to Alzheimer's dementia. And then one other loss and some other type of cognitive ability, perhaps your ability to solve problems, for example.
Okay.
So it's memory loss plus at least one other type of cognitive function.
Okay. And one of the reasons I kind of think diet is such a big part of this is if you look at kind of the cases of dementia and Alzheimer's, and granted, we are living longer, so that factors into it a little bit, I think. But it correlates very closely with like the path of diabetes and obesity and the availability of processed foods and sugar in our diet. If you look at charts of those things and you line them all up, they correlate pretty well. So I do think diet's important, and diets that I think have gotten the most praise as it relates to dealing with the mind and dealing with cognitive ability is, of course, the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. The DASH diet being developed specifically for health problems, but then you've kind of taken your MIND diet and you've melded those two together to make something a little bit different. Can you kind of go through the Mediterranean diet and the value of that and what's good in there, what's good in the DASH diet, and then how your diet kind of takes both of those and uses it?
Of course. So the Mediterranean diet is a cultural diet, and it's not actually one diet because there's multiple countries that line the Mediterranean Sea. So they all have variations. So there isn't a single Mediterranean diet, and I think it causes a lot of confusion. People really don't understand what it is. The traditional Greek Mediterranean diet that has the most study has four more vegetables a day, 4 more fruits per day, 6 fish meals a week, only whole grains, and there are no processed, high sugary, high salt, high fat foods, and very heavy on extra virgin olive oil. I think 4 tablespoons per day, so very heavy use of that. And the DASH diet was developed to control blood pressure, to prevent hypertension. And both of those diets have been tested in randomized intervention trials and shown to have very strong cardiovascular effects. They lower blood pressure, lower diabetes risk, lower inflammation and oxidation, reduce risk of heart attacks and strokes. So they have so many positive benefits. Now, the MIND diet, we took each of the core components of the DASH in the Mediterranean, and we modified each of the components to reflect what we know of from the literature, the scientific literature on nutrition and the brain. So, for example, for vegetables, in the nutrition dementia literature, green leafy vegetables are stronger on their effects on preserving cognitive abilities over time than any other of the vegetable categories. So we separate out green leafy vegetables and say consume those almost daily, and then consume at least one other vegetable daily. So that's one change. Both the DASH and the Mediterranean diets have 4 or more fruits per day. In the nutrition and brain literature, fruits as a general category have not been shown to slow cognitive decline and reduce the occurrence of dementia. But berries are one fruit that have been linked to better brain health, both from multiple well-controlled animal models as well as in some very large human studies like the Nurses' Health Study and our own Chicago Health and Aging Project. So we recommend 2 to 5 servings of berries a week, and these aren't specifically mentioned in either the DASH or the Mediterranean diets. So other than that, consume fruits, other kinds of fruits to your liking. We certainly don't say don't eat them. It's just we don't highlight them in the MIND diet.
Okay.
Seafood is another modification we made. So as I mentioned, the Mediterranean diet has about 6 meals per week that are seafood meals, whereas the literature in Alzheimer's research and also looking at cognitive decline over time shows that 1 seafood meal a week is the level of protective benefit. So we modified that component for the MIND diet and say we eat at least 1 seafood meal a week. So that's a modification that we made to a serving size and frequency. And then we also say to reduce fried foods. We don't say completely cut them out of your diet, but to limit the use of butter and fried foods and sweets and pastries, because they contribute a lot of the saturated fat and trans fats in Americans' diets. So by limiting these foods, you're limiting the bad fats that have been shown in Alzheimer's research to double or even triple your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease.
The 40 Plus Fitness podcast is sponsored by Health IQ, an insurance company that helps health conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, and vegetarians get lower rates on their life insurance. Go to healthiq.com/40 plus to support the show and see if you qualify. Again, that's healthiq.com/40PLUS.
Okay. Now, recently, and I sometimes follow this eating style myself, and predominantly because my ancestors weren't anywhere around the Mediterranean area; they were further up north. So the availability of vegetables and fruits and olives and things like that, they just weren't there. So I tend to follow a little bit higher fat, low carb eating plan, a little bit more along the lines of what I believe my ancestors were probably eating. What are your thoughts on that in general, and about the studies and things that have been done on that specifically?
You mean a low carbohydrate diet? Is that what you mean?
Yes. So basically trying to get myself into ketosis and some of the cognitive benefits of being in ketosis.
Okay. Well, I base my views on this on scientific data. And as of now, there is no scientific data to support that a ketogenic type diet is beneficial for the brain. There's a theory that it would be helpful to the Alzheimer's brain because in Alzheimer's brains, the cells in the brain, the neuron cells, are ineffective in taking in glucose for energy. So the ketogenic diets are thought to be an alternative source of energy in the case of an Alzheimer's disease. But that's not the normal health state of the human body. So without scientific data, I would not recommend it. Currently, there's a clinical trial that's testing the ketogenic diet in Alzheimer's patients to see if it affects them in a positive way. I'm not aware of other trials in people that don't have Alzheimer's disease, but I would hope before too many people start following that diet that there's more research to tell us one way or the other whether it's healthy.
Yeah. I think one of the takeaways I kind of got from your book, and then just kind of thinking through this holistically, would be if you're not eating bacon every meal, you're occasionally you might have a piece of this or a piece of that, kind of like you allow a little bit of this, a little bit of that, just for the middle awareness that you're going to want some of those things from time to time. But eating fish, eating green leafy vegetables particularly, you can get into ketosis. Utilizing olive oil, using avocado oil, those type of more healthy oils, I think you can still maintain that lifestyle. And then I think the other kind of side of it is I'm a big proponent of the quality of your food. And unfortunately, every study I've seen that's kind of what I'd say it comes to the conclusion that red meat and is bad. It always says red meat and processed meat, whereas it never sits there and says carbohydrates and processed carbohydrates as a good thing just because fruits are good, but they don't lump them in. And so I wish someone would do this particular study and say if someone is, and you kind of mentioned this, there is a sect of us out there that kind of think if the quality of the way your animal is raised is going to impart into the quality of the nutrition you get from the food. I do think that's a very important aspect of it, that when someone is eating more of a Mediterranean or a vegetarian diet, I think they're also doing a lot of other things to improve their health. And I'm not sure we've done enough studies to kind of get those confounders out of there.
Oh, well, that's the reason for the randomized diet intervention trials. And there have been randomized diet intervention trials for the Mediterranean diet and for the DASH diet. And we are currently doing such a trial for the MIND diet. So in a randomized diet intervention trial, you randomly assign people to a certain diet or another. And so all of those confounders are also randomized so that the result that you get is an effect of the diet and not other things that people might do in tandem with a healthy diet if we just observe them in their natural setting.
Is there a particular questionnaire that you do at the beginning and the end to talk about the amount of exercise they're doing, how well they're sleeping, their stress management, and other, happiness
Absolutely.
factors? Okay. Because I think that's,
Yeah.
every time I read the studies, it's like they just focus on that one thing, and it's almost as if they designed the study to prove their hypothesis. And I like to hear that there's some studies that are going on that are literally just saying, we have no skin in the game. We still have a hypothesis because that's experiment. But to sit there and say we don't know what the answer is going to be in the end because we're doing this in a kind of a blind way.
Well, certainly there are some studies that are not well designed to try and eliminate those kinds of confounding and biases. But there are many well-controlled, well-designed studies in the nutrition field. But the Cadillac, if you will, or the Tesla of studies is always considered to be the randomized intervention trial, because it is very difficult to tease apart people's behaviors.
Yeah. There was one of the studies, they were in a kind of a care facility, and I thought that's because you know exactly what they're putting in their bodies and you know exactly what their activity levels are, and I think that gives you, but the rest of us are not going to live in that bubble, so it's very hard to get that data. Now, one of the other things that I really liked about your book is you kind of got into these things, you call them brain-body principles, and I think they're brilliant. So if you don't mind going through each of those principles, I'd really appreciate it.
I didn't think of. So why don't you give me some examples?
Okay. Well, one of them you talk about is individual variance, and I always tell my clients, I said, if everybody's did the same thing, we wouldn't all get the same results because there's this individual variance, and you have to think about what your body type, what you're capable of doing, and you have to build a program that fits your life. So that was one you had in there. Then you talk about like overload, progression, adaptation, use it or lose it, and specificity, which again, all of those are kind of the terms that we use when we're training our clients, particularly for physical fitness. Those are all the things that we talk about. If you want to see progress, if you want to get better, you've got to do something a little different than what you're doing today.
Okay, so I can tell you why those principles didn't jump out at me when you said them. And that is because half of the book was written by my daughter, Laura Morris, who is a personal trainer, certified in nutrition, and also went to chef school. So the second part of the book has 80 of her unbelievably wonderful recipes, all that you incorporate the foods of the Mind Diet. But a lot of her personal training principles, which are the ones that you just mentioned.
Which is why I would gravitate to it, exactly. But yeah, and the recipes are great. I can't wait to try the broccolini, the lemon broccolini, and she had one in here was, I guess basically you cook the grapefruit to caramelize it, and so there were a couple in there. I was like, I rabbit-eared those. I'm like, okay, I'm coming back to put those into use because they looked wonderful. I guess finally, go ahead.
No, I was just saying they really are delicious.
And there's over 80 of them. There's 80 of them in here. So yeah, there's quite a bit of variety and opportunities for you to kind of put something new into use. And so I am looking forward to hitting a couple of those. Now, when we talk about food, obviously food's part of it, but there's a little bit more to, making sure that you're taking care of your brain. We talked a little bit about things like exercise, sleep, and whatnot. Could you kind of go through some of those other principles that you think, some things that we should be considering in just incorporating in our lifestyle in general, besides making sure that we're getting the right food?
So I always like to point out to people that diet and exercise are the two primary driving forces for all of the chronic diseases associated with aging. So almost all of them. So if you incorporate a healthy diet and daily or regular exercise into your life, you will be helping to reduce your risk of hypertension, hypercholesteremia, diabetes, heart attacks, strokes, and you will also be helping to keep your brain healthy and functioning. So I do like to point out that, and that has been demonstrated, exercise and diet through randomized intervention trials of reducing all of those things. In addition to that, there's studies that have looked at cognitive activities, and it's very consistently related and shown to be associated with slower decline in cognitive abilities and reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease. And underlying the cognitive activities is the principle of neural reserve. So there's all of these synaptic connections in the brain. That's what makes us move and think and feel. And the more synaptic connections there are, which are generated through activity, cognitive activity, the more neural connections there are to go around any kind of pathologies that develop in the brain. And that's the theory of cognitive reserve. So the more you push yourself and stimulate the brain, not just doing the same thing over and over, but challenging yourself cognitively, learning a new instrument or a new language, social activities and new relationships, managing relationships, all of those things help to build this cognitive reserve. Sleep is another very interesting area that also needs a lot more development in the area of dementia. But it looks like sleep is a time that the accumulation of bad proteins in the brain is removed and a time for regeneration. So it looks like, but we still need some randomized trials to verify that better sleep will also reduce your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So exercise and cognitively stimulating and socially stimulating activities are all important. Controlling your weight so that you are not obese. There's been some very interesting studies that have shown that people in their middle-aged years, if they have hypertension or hypercholesteremia or obesity, they're at much greater risk of developing Alzheimer's disease when they get older. So keeping, good control over those factors, keeping your blood cholesterol low and your hypertension under control are all very important. Aside from that, let's see.
Well,
there's
the other one you had was the positive outlook on life, and I think that
absolutely
that goes without
there you
saying.
go.
I've interviewed quite a few longevity doctors, and almost to a person, they say, it's not the life in your year. I mean, it's not the years in your life; it's the life in your years. And if you go around with a good positive mental attitude, that adds just so much quality to your life that you want to keep healthy, and so they all kind of play with each other.
Yes, that's very true. And there's been other studies in the dementia field that show that neuroticism, anxiety, negative stress are all put you at greater risk of dementia. So, yeah, all of those things are things that we have under our control. And so there is much that we can do to reduce our risk of getting this awful disease.
And that is the good news of the book, is that this is, it's not something, I mean, it can happen. It could happen to any of us, and it's going to happen to a lot of us, but it is something that we're in our control to do something about and slow the progression or even potentially prevent it from happening in the first place.
Right. That is very true. Even if we delay the occurrence by 5 years, that could delay it well into our oldest years of life, which makes it, much less burdensome to ourselves and our families.
Time with grandchildren and maybe great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
So Dr. Morris, if someone wanted to learn more about you or learn more about the book, Diet for the Mind, where would you like for me to send them?
Oh, well, we don't have a website, but if you Google Diet for the Mind, you will bring up, all the places where you can purchase it. And we're in the process of doing this trial. So that's one of the reasons why I don't have a website,
Yeah,
because
busy,
we do have people that are not on the Mind Diet, and we don't want to make it easy for them to go up on a site and look up what the Mind Diet is.
Okay.
So it's for that reason that I don't have a website.
Well, what I'll do, I'll make sure in the show notes, this is 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/302, because this is episode 302. I'll make sure to have a link to where they can purchase it on Amazon. So again, thank you, Dr. Morris, for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
Sure. Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, would you please take the time to go to iTunes and leave us a rating and review? You can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/review to leave a rating and review today. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Natalie Wise and discuss her book, The Self-Discipline Handbook. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.